Welcome everyone to the June Walk Massachusetts Network meeting. I'm going to turn it over to our speaker now, Amy Dain.
Hi, thank you. I'm Amy Dain. I'm a senior fellow at Boston Indicators at the Boston Foundation, and I've been working on housing and zoning policy for a couple of decades now. I'm excited to share a presentation with you. I just need to share my screen. Mhm. Okay. And yes. Okay. We're all set, right? So yeah, thank you for the opportunity to talk about housing and walkability in my research. This presentation is about ways to add housing and increase walking. And I put in Greater Boston here, but Massachusetts as a whole. I know we've got Worcester and Springfield and East Hampton and other communities in the room on the Zoom. And I hope that this work is and these ideas are relevant statewide. In general, there are two strategies or approaches to accomplish the goal. One is to add housing to already walkable areas, and another is to add housing to areas that aren't very walkable, but then make them more walkable. That's called suburban retrofit. For the first category of the approach, I have a case study. I just made the case study this morning on a walk in my neighborhood. Nobody's seen it before today. You're the first to see this. So I took a walk around the neighborhood, and these photos in the presentation are all from today. It's really lovely outside today. Oh, and I think I have a video here. Let's see if it plays. Okay, that was that. This is a satellite view of the neighborhood. The circle is around the area where I walked. It's easy to see from satellite images what parts of Greater Boston and the whole state are walkable and what areas aren't. In the middle of this screen is Newtonville. On the left is the 128 corridor, and on the right is some suburban sprawl. And you can really see the differences there in patterns of land use, subdivision, and buildings and greenery. My neighborhood has really nice sidewalks. It has places to walk to as well. Here's the high school and the elementary school and a playground. There are restaurants and shops. There's Cabot's Ice Cream, the Village Cafe. And by the way, this is the neighborhood I grew up in, and I lived some other places, but moved back, and I live right around the corner from my mom now. My kids have gone to the same schools that I went to. Uh, Here's the new senior center in Newtonville, and I've really been bugging my mom to start going there. It just opened this year. Here's an ad for an event. The event's actually in Newton Highlands on Friday, but you could come across this info scrolling on Facebook or strolling in the neighborhood, Juneteenth celebration. Importantly, you can walk to public transportation, both the train and buses in the neighborhood. And I think I have a little video here too. Oh, sorry, that's it. Wow. There we go. Just people walking on the platform. That's actually the commuter train on the stop that I take twice a week. I go into the office and I commute by train. And my dad always took that train when I was growing up. He worked in Boston. And these are photos of two bus shelters right in my neighborhood. The neighborhood has a lot of single family homes and two-family homes. I live in a two-family home. There are also townhouses and other multifamily buildings. This is right in Newtonville. Trio was built a few years ago. City Council approved the zoning for the project, and my kids walked past it while it was getting constructed. They'd walked past it on their way to middle school a few years back. Note the bus in the photo. I was excited to catch that for the presentation this morning. And that took a few years to get approved by City Council. Here's another relatively new development in Newtonville on Austin Street. It was a city parking lot before, and it still is a municipal parking lot. The parking is now under the building and behind the building, metered parking for the public. But now we have all of this housing right there in the middle of Newtonville. Um, And that one took more time, I think, to approve by city council than the other one that I showed you. I think this was like 10 years in the making, but it was city owned property. Took a lot of leadership for people to say we don't just need a plain parking lot. Oh, and I just wanted to point out there's parking in this picture, but that's the parking that goes with the supermarket and is not the parking with this development. I just took the picture across the lot. This is four new homes in Newtonville built recently. The property had a single family house. It was a pretty big property, and the zoning allowed for two homes by right on the property, like a duplex or a two family, or four units by special permit. So I listened to a public hearing about the special permit, and it was actually a really stressful public hearing. The parcel is long, and the surrounding lots are small, so it has a lot of neighbors. And if I don't know how often you all go to public hearings around housing, but if you want to get in touch with like human fears and vulnerabilities, go to a hearing about housing development. When decisions about housing production are hyper local, it becomes hard to balance the legitimate and intense fears of neighbors with like the fundamental human needs for housing or with the big picture of need for more housing in walkable areas. So fears were expressed at this hearing about rodents and crime and flooding and traffic accidents and parking and more. And terrible things can happen in life. So we have governments in place and regulations to mitigate risks. But housing shortage, housing instability, housing unaffordability, and sprawl don't make society better if that's the solution to the fears, which is sort of in effect what our system of housing regulation and these public hearings have led to by sort of elevating the concerns of neighbors against sort of the larger regional needs for housing and thoughts about sort of patterns of development. Public hearings for special permits create a special kind of forum for expressing human fears and end up preventing needed housing. So, part of the solution to this issue is to allow development as of right. So there is not a need for discretionary decision making about each specific housing proposal. There can be a site plan review that's consistent with as of right permitting, which and the site plan reviews and opportunities for neighbors to speak up about their concerns and alert government to potential risks related to development, but not to, you can't use site plan review to reject a development. And you can use special permit, hearing process to reject and to, make a project not happen. So the state adopted the MBTA community zoning law in 2021 to require cities and towns that are served by the MBTA to zone for multifamily housing as of right near MBTA stations when possible. Before MBTA communities, Newton did not allow any multifamily housing by right. To build any multifamily housing in Newton before MBTA communities, you either needed a special permit like that 4-unit project I was showing you, or you needed for city council to rezone the parcel, which was what we saw with those bigger developments. I think were rezonings. Um, Here's a map of the areas in Newton that got rezoned for multifamily housing as of right in compliance with MBTA communities. The red, green, and blue parts are the new districts. So I'm going to zoom in. This is the new zoning in Newtonville. It covers a part of Newtonville, not all of Newtonville. Uh, so this house was going to be renovated into 3 units, is in that one of those districts, one of the green district parcels. It was going to be renovated into 3 units, but when the new zoning passed, they added a fourth unit. It was allowed by right. And so here you're looking at a picture of 4 homes allowed by right, steps from shops and the train station. This property is also getting redeveloped under the new MBTA communities as of right zoning. The old building is getting preserved and they're adding a new structure behind it and adding units within this structure. Uh, So housing is good for Newtonville. More residents and more homes mean more households to support walkable infrastructure, and infrastructure in general. More households support stores and restaurants, and there's definitely just a ton of vitality in Newtonville. I think a lot of the housing has added to that, and we've seen more retail and restaurants open since the housing's gone in. It means more constituents to support funding for public transportation and improve the public transportation. It means more riders on the trains and buses. It means more walking, more neighbors. The region and state needs more housing, and so more housing is good for Massachusetts. And this isn't just like about Newtonville. I can walk out my door and see all these things, and like to me, Newtonville is very special. But I realize I've actually like been on a tour of cities and towns across Massachusetts, and especially their downtown areas. And I'm on a mission to visit all of them. I'm like well over 100 at this point, and Newtonville actually isn't so special. There are hundreds of walkable downtowns and village centers and main streets like all across the state. So that's great. It's a huge asset for Massachusetts that we have all of this places that were developed significantly before cars began to dominate, transportation in Massachusetts and nationwide. Um, so this is just a picture of a few other downtowns, but there are so many, and it's a real opportunity for adding housing and increasing walkability. So this is just like more text than I usually put on a slide. But just hold on. Here we go. Um, there are a bunch of things like when you're thinking about adding housing to walkable neighborhoods, like here are some of my recommendations to add infill small scale multifamily housing over a large land area. I think this is one of the challenges in Newton. We actually have like more than 15 projects in MBTA community zoning coming through, but they add up to like less than 100 net new units in a city that's got 33,000 housing units. So it's a very small rate of growth. And I think that we can definitely meet some of a large portion of the housing needs through small scale multifamily development, but you can't meet a significant portion of housing needs if you only zone for small scale multifamily housing on a few blocks. Then you get a few hundred units, across places, and we need thousands of units. And so we need for that kind of zoning, the green zoning in Newtonville, to like really cover large areas of land across Massachusetts around in these neighborhoods that are particularly walkable. We should incentivize, like Newton did, preservation of old buildings by allowing even more units if you preserve the building. That's a very effective strategy, and we're seeing lots of historic preservation in Newton with the as of right zoning under MBTA communities. We should be finding locations to allow high rise and mid rise multifamily housing and not only like the small scale developments. I think we're not going to solve the whole housing crisis with just small scale multifamily housing, but we can with a combination of both the smaller scale and the bigger scale. And really, like you need, like I was just saying, you need to zone small scale multifamily housing over a very wide land area to make a difference, but you don't have to zone for high rise buildings across a large land area to make a difference because those units add up a lot more quickly. So most of these historic downtowns walkable areas have lots of great parcels that would be appropriate for bigger scale development, just like you saw in those Newtonville developments that were in places that have been a great asset to the community and great for the people who live there. And I see properties like that all over, and you don't have to do sort of blanket high-rise zoning in order to achieve those ends. You can be kind of strategic and surgical with that high intensity density zoning. Okay, and then one other thing that really helps with walkability is remove minimum on-site parking requirements and to like manage parking, public parking more effectively, or to give attention to how you're managing parking for the whole walkable region can help. And also allow I was talking about multifamily housing, but duplexes and ADUs aren't really considered multifamily housing, but they do add to walkability and density and infill in these kinds of areas. And the state legalized ADUs statewide, which is incredible. And we are seeing a big uptick in ADU production, but there are opportunities for cities and towns to go beyond what the state allowed. And I think that the cities and towns that have gone beyond what the state's allowing are seeing even more ADUs built. So that's something for you to think about for communities. Also allow small lot single family houses, cottage courts. This is an interesting thing I think is almost an oversight in a lot of zoning codes that use there's zoning for townhouses in lots of places like the attached multifamily housing. But it actually isn't legal in a lot of those cases to build cottage courts. Like you could have the same zoning, except that the units could be either attached or detached. And it's just a tweak in the words, and you get a different kind of development. And I think there are a few cases in different places of like excellent cottage courts. I think there's market interest in it. And that's something we should be thinking about how we can change our zoning to allow more cottage courts to be built. First floor retail. Sorry, it's a list of items without photos, but the first floor retail, everybody loves mixed use development, and there's a lot of political support for it across communities. And one of the things I found in a survey of zoning in 2019 was that like in a lot of communities, the only way to build multifamily housing is with first floor commercial retail. And not every place has a good market for retail. And so that becomes like an added cost and a barrier to building multifamily housing. I think there are certain places where you are building multifamily housing right in the middle of your main street area of like walkability in stores where you definitely want to protect the first floor retail and make sure whatever's built has a first floor retail component. But we should think about that not every property is appropriate for first floor retail requirements. So use it carefully. And favor as of right zoning, because the discretionary zoning is really a drag on the development. It adds cost, it adds time, and really is driving up the cost of production and leading to the housing shortage we have. Okay, so that's about adding housing to walkable neighborhoods. And the point of that, as I sort of have framed this, is to get the housing that we need as a state because we have a housing shortage and to increase walking and use of public transportation and biking and all these great things. But there's another side to the coin is this adding housing to areas that aren't particularly walkable. And this is not something to be dismissed lightly because it's actually like where we're adding most housing. And it's not to say like that's the wrong thing to do to add housing to those areas that aren't particularly walkable because if we weren't doing that, the short housing shortage would be like significantly bigger because that is where we're adding housing. And there's a lot of political support for it. And there are a lot of properties in areas that aren't particularly walkable that are really ripe for redevelopment. So you have, aging office parks, industrial parks, strip malls, and shopping malls and retail complexes that are just like crying out for redevelopment right now. And there's more like political support for it because they don't often those kind of properties don't have as many current residential neighborhoods like directly abutting them or within them. And so there are huge opportunities. We could solve the housing crisis by just building out strip mall corridors. And MAPC did an analysis of this like a few years ago where they looked at the potential for housing development just in strip mall corridors. And it's huge. But the challenge then is if we were to just build out hundreds of thousands of homes in our strip mall corridors and in these areas that aren't very walkable, is that you generate just like a lot more traffic and not much walking. So that's like a huge challenge. And to be honest, nobody's like sort of exactly solved this issue, but it's something that it's great to have all of you thinking about. Maybe you're already thinking about it. I would like for it to get more attention is like how we knit these developments into the urban fabric of Greater Boston, Massachusetts. So, what I want to say is this is like all that I'm saying is especially true of properties along Route 128. This is like a satellite view of part of Lexington that's gaining hundreds of housing units through the MBTA communities. It's just like one example of an area by a highway that's a little less walkable. I mentioned the study I did in 2019 and pointed out that that study pointed out that towns were allowing incremental growth in their centers and more on their edges. And an example from the 2019 study was Needham, that at the time had just like allowed a 10-unit project in its historic walkable train served center. And then it had permitted 136 units, 390 units, and 52 units right on Route 128. And for Bedford, uh-oh. Oh, there we go. For Bedford, Route 3 is the relevant highway. In Bedford in the 2010s, Bedford allowed 7 units to be built in the center. That's that top photo. And then 188 units on the edge of town on the far side of Route 3 from the rest of the town. And that was in a former industrial area. And here's a property in Weston, also on Route 128, and it's in the pipeline for hundreds of housing units through MBTA communities zoning right on Route 128. And so here's what I've been like thinking about all of this is that one thing is maybe we should be strategic about thinking about where we go big on Route 128 instead of medium sized so that there's a value to leverage in the new development to create the infrastructure and support the mixed uses. In any case, we should be planning for bike connectivity, bus service, connections to train stations and walking routes. And actually, that's the good news. I didn't show you like through each of those slides, but there are rail trails, bike routes and some train stations and bus routes that do go right by some of those properties that I was pointing out along 128. And even anywhere you look on the 128 corridor, you're not far from historic walkable downtown. You're not far from tons of amenities, from jobs. So it's not shouldn't be a huge lift to knit those kind of developments into the urban fabric in the 128 corridor. But it's something that we need to be thinking about as we do that development planning for. And there's just so much development going on in the corridor. I think we're a step behind the kind of planning that we need to do, and it would be good to like step up in that area. But in general, statewide, this is an issue, real challenge for seizing the opportunity to redevelop office parks and strip mall corridors and do it in a way that um, improves walkability or like has a walkable component and has connection to public transportation. Okay, and we really need to, just it's always important to think about parking management, and sometimes there are just small tweaks with the parking that can add to walkability, like if you centralize parking in part of a parcel versus having parking live inside each building can lead to different outcomes in terms of how much people drive and how much people walk. And so we should always be prioritizing pedestrians. And this brings us to the end of my presentation. This is from my walk in Newtonville this morning. There's a little stream that's mostly underground, but it's daylighted in this little strip. It like goes under the high school and under the elementary school and somewhere reaches the Charles River, but it appears in my neighborhood for a little bit. And yeah, that's actually just as a side point, another thing to flag in your mind that people have really not figured out is a lot of our walkable neighborhoods are in low-lying areas that where wetlands had been filled and rivers had been put underground. And so thinking about how we manage stormwater in those areas and relate development to our like plans for dealing with flooding is just another thing to flag in thinking about for planning. I think some people maybe are starting to work out, our state level strategies on this. But that's definitely something I think about and don't feel entirely satisfied about. So more work to be done. But thank you, and I will end. Oh, what I wanted to say actually before I close out is please connect with me on LinkedIn, and also you can follow me on Instagram at Amy Dain, and I like post pictures of like different from visits to different places and about zoning and land use issues. Okay, and I'm going to stop sharing now.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Amy. This was excellent. I'm sure folks will have questions. I started jotting down jotting down things like as you were speaking. And so if people want to raise hands for questions, I can call on you. I will start things off with so I live in Framingham, and we had an interesting journey to compliance, I will say,
Yeah,
with MBTA communities. Um, One thing that I have noticed is that we are 351 cities and towns here in Massachusetts, and there are some like low-hanging fruit things that doesn't make sense for Framingham on its own. But once you start going up one level and looking at Framingham Natick, it makes so much more sense to maybe rezone along the Constituent Rail Trail because then there is a great bike walk connection to Natick Center where people might
interesting.
not be comfortable getting to Framingham Center, but the fact that there would be this, protected route, uh, it really kind of unlocks other parcels that might be able to be rezoned because there are a ton of um, basically underused commercial parcels along Speen Street. So I'm just wondering, like, if you have seen that in other places, because you mentioned, Bedford and Lexington, and I immediately think Minuteman Rail Trail, like, and how there are connections to transit or downtowns because of the trails. Um,
Right.
are there other places that have thought about rezoning along trails and how that can be a, a spur?
Right. There's so many opportunities, so many great rail trails. I'm not sure. I There may be some zoning overlays related to rail trails in particular, but I think that it just in general, a lot of our like downtown Main Street rezonings do happen to be by rail trails in a lot of communities. A lot of the development in Lexington and yeah, and both the development in Lexington on 128 and in the center and like along the arterial roads between the two are like by the rail trail, which is
Hmm,
incredible. And Everett is the biggest center of development outside of Boston in Massachusetts right now.
hmm,
And that development is also near some rail trails like that go up to Lynn and
right.
connect in. So I think there are a lot of like opportunities there. But in terms of Framingham's such an interesting case study because it's got that great historic center downtown
Right.
and then some other centers, kind of like Newton has multiple centers. Framingham has a
For
few.
sure.
But I thought that Waverly Street, is it Waverly Ave or Street?
Yep.
Which Ave or
Av.
Ave
Yeah.
in Framingham is like a strip mall corridor that's like auto oriented that's right next to the historic downtown and by the train station. And so in a way that provides an opportunity to think about how we redevelop and zone for that kind of corridor, but in an area that like very very much could be knit in with the urban fabric. Like it's
For
not in
sure.
the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
Like
And so folks can orient themselves. Waverly Street is also 135, and it's like the Boston Marathon route as it goes through Framingham. So it's alongside the commuter rail train tracks and stuff like that.
But it
So
has like a lot of garages and car sales places and things with like huge parking lots. And it's
it was actually the location where Walk Massachusetts last summer did a walk on it as part of the Boston MPO's no heat effort because it is
okay.
incredibly hot. There, not much shade,
Right,
lack of trees. So,
right.
yeah.
Right, exactly. And I think like I think about that a lot for zoning. Like I would love for anybody who's like overseeing redevelopment of those kind of areas to think about can they like widen the sidewalks as a part of the redevelopment and get in more street trees. And sometimes you can use the zoning to just like give density bonuses if they'll like widen the sidewalk or like there can be opportunities for that. And I know that in some places the street trees are hard to add because of wires and other issues, but like that's a place definitely. There's some new developments that have gone in there and they're just steps from the train station, but it's like an unpleasant walk on like a narrow sidewalk with no
Yeah.
trees and like yeah, in the
Or
summer
or they do a
hot.
horrible landscape strip that's not doing anything for anyone as
Yeah.
a yeah. So in between the sidewalk and the building. So
Yeah. So it's like a top priority in thinking about the zoning to think about how you improve that infrastructure as you redevelop.
great.
Yeah, is
Yeah.
is a big one.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Um, Karen, do you have thoughts from out in Worcester that you would like to share?
Putting me on the spot. As always, so I grew up outside of Boston, actually. I grew up in Reading and I could sprint to the train. So, and have lived in several other places around the US that were much more uh, walk and bike friendly. I guess we have so many places in this city. It would have a different character than you were describing, but so many places that have potential here. I mean, we don't have resistance to the zoning because it's not. I mean, it's just not. It's not the same. Well, one of the towns outside of Worcester does,
Yeah.
and has gotten themselves into a lot of trouble, right? Um, but I guess I had brought up to Yolando, I'm interested in what you would say. I've brought up to Yolando and Brendan recently that I'm really interested both on it's for work as well as my advocacy work, but in the concepts of it's not just about housing, it's about all the other things that we put in unwalkable places. And I guess so I don't know if you want to comment on just not just the housing part and making it more walkable about any conversations you're hearing or any whispers of conversations you're hearing about an idea of shifting where we put places that are valuable destinations um, and and not just homes.
Right. You mean like not even just where we like locate zone for stores, but like making decisions about public institutions or if
Yeah, I
like,
mean, I guess I'll put Betsy on the spot and, how many people have been killed getting across the street to a library? And that's just one of, countless examples of places people want to go. So I don't know if it feels to me like a next step, Housing is something that's on a lot of people's minds right now, but it's also just
yeah.
about land use generally.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, one of the things I hear a lot is like we love walkable centers, but like we love the ones we have so much, let's not change them. And that if they're so great, like let's build more elsewhere is sort of one perspective out there. And I think that like people don't always realize like how hard it is to rebuild what we built over like centuries. So like to build it's not even just about like building some stores and some housing and a walkable setup, but like Newtonville example, like you've got schools and you have libraries and senior centers and train stations, like and all this retail space. And a lot of it was built before cars, so they were already built without like parking built into every single property, which makes it more walkable because you don't have cars coming and going from every property. And then you have like some centralized parking that got sort of shoehorned in the 1950s. So people park once and then visit the whole downtown area. And that when you build new ones, like there have been all these lifestyle malls, like Legacy Place, and then there's one in Linfield, Market Street. And like Legacy Place has the parking in the center, and then Market Street has it around the outside. But it's like in either setup, it's not knit together with an ongoing fabric of settlement. It's like either you have parking like dominates the new development. And so to build like these new places that aren't dominated by parking is very challenging because you're not going to get the funding to build all these new buildings without a plan to have drivers come to the place. While these other places were already built that way. So it's not a matter of like getting financing to like build the library without a lot of parking because the library already exists there and it's walkable. So it's hard to sort of recreate those conditions for walkability with like a new build from scratch. And I think that's part of the challenge of these rebuilding areas that were office parks, where sometimes you can like build in some stores and housing together for a lifestyle mall, but it's not quite what, an old time walkable neighborhood is, where there's like a continuity of the urban fabric.
Alexis, get your hand up.
Yeah. Um, this might be separate, but how much do you think of this would be just solved if we changed it from property tax to land use tax? Because I often feel like property tax incentivized smaller commercial buildings with drive-throughs and with large yards and asphalt and
Hmm.
more small footprints.
Right. And so if you weren't getting taxed more for more development, you'd be incentivized to build bigger and more units. Yeah, I mean, that hasn't been like the focus of my research. Definitely, it's like a big part of the whole puzzle and maybe could change the politics of things where people felt like, oh, to really make their development, their property, financially viable, they're going to need to build bigger. Um, could change the equation. It's definitely something to think about.
Betsy, you're on mute.
It was easy to have the example of the first type, adding housable to walking areas. What are there even a handful of different kinds of examples where it's actually happened, where housing has, been built or been planned with making it walkable at the same time, if they've, when they've been built in a previously unwalkable area. I mean, I think we need to really get a collection and to have this actually happen. I think we really need to see um, getting a whole bunch of different kinds of examples
Yeah. No,
of
there
that.
are books written nationally, like so the suburban retrofit. I think that might be the name of the book, of looking at some case studies. In Massachusetts, there are a number of lifestyle malls that, it's like the second generation mall, or like actual shopping malls where it's still a traditional mall, but like added housing, and there's some more sort of mixed use connection there. Um, I don't know of cases where there's been like a true like rebuild, like a scratch build of a walkable mixed use downtown that has sort of all of what our historic downtowns offer. But I do think there are probably, if you looked, more like case studies where you've got a development on a highway, but like it didn't cost a lot to connect it in with the rail trail kind of thing, or there are some small fixes that can like help people get around in alternative ways, or maybe there was like a bus route that got extended to a development that was on a highway and people are taking that bus. Like there are things like that, which may be like smaller bits, and it's not all of the joy that is like a historic walkable center. But there are like opportunities to do that.
I mean, Brendan knows well one of our opportunities in Springfield, which there was an effort when it was being considered and built, but hasn't, 20, 15 years later has not happened. And that's our relatively new senior center that is a third of a mile from two senior developments. And a there's a signalization that isn't long enough for the seniors, and then no sidewalk.
Yeah, they got it right on the distance, right? Like they put it really close to the uh the senior center. The new senior center is really close to senior housing that somewhat ironically is called Independence House, but they have to run a shuttle bus from Independence House to the senior center because the intersection on Roosevelt Ave is very, very scary and dangerous to
No,
get.
no. I mean, their solution was to just add a lot of bus service, which to their credit they did, but
Yeah,
it isn't walkable.
yeah. So it's like they got 95% of the way there. So I think that's the piece that all of us as advocates and folks that are looking for this need to be the ones pushing on that to get
Right.
it over the edge.
Right. Those
Yeah.
little, I think there are so many opportunities for that, and it's great that you're looking at that. And when I was looking at this development in Weston that's coming for hundreds of units right on 128, the rail
Is that the
trail,
one with the scary yard signs, or is that a different one?
oh, no, no, no. I know the monster yard
Yeah.
signs are for 40B,
Yeah.
that's separate from this one.
Yeah.
But this is an office park that's going to get hundreds of units of housing, and it's right on the highway. And I looked, it's like a 2 mile walking route to the train station.
Hmm.
If you go and on the street, but there aren't even sidewalks there. So it would be like a 2 mile walk through existing routes with no sidewalks, which isn't going to happen very often. But like from the parcel, and I think the train station's moving, there could be an internal connection from
Hmm.
where the housing is to it. But it kind of needs to be planned in, and it's going to be a cost. And is it going to happen? So that's like amazing to connect houses to the train station and also to the Mass Central Rail Trail,
Hmm.
which may not, it's like there's some wetlands there. So it's not like it's obvious that you'll be able to walk to the train or to the rail trail, but that, like, I haven't been involved in, the planning of this property, and I don't know what the costs are to create like bridges over wetlands, but like that's something, yeah, for people and advocates to be looking at, because if you don't create those connections, then you've basically like everyone's driving because you except for the rare person who's going to walk 2 miles with no sidewalk on an
Right.
arterial road to get to the train station.
Right. Great. Are there other questions? I know there were a bunch of a flurry of emails that went around. David, I think you had responded to one of them. Do you want to share the?
Well, I mean, there was one email that talked about basically setbacks, property setbacks for housing development, no matter what style, as being moats that separate and are basically restrictive and keep people away. And I pointed out, I think I responded privately, not to the list, that I grew up in a nice little neighborhood with single family homes, and we all had front yards, and there were no fences. And I and my brother and all other people in the neighborhood played across those front yards. And we had tree-lined streets, and we knew our neighbors, and we went door to door selling things, and it was a great community feel. And I walked to elementary school, and I walked to middle school, and later on, my family never owned a car until I had gone to college. Um, and I'm saying, no, no, you don't think of setbacks as being automatically bad. The point is, does the extent of set, in fact, I said pointed out that in Brookline, I often hear the opposite thing, a lot of anger about, apartment buildings or, multi-family buildings being constructed, pushing out to every edge of the lot line. And that being very unfriendly. So, I mean, the question is what's friendly versus not friendly depends a lot on design and context. When something is pushed back, sure, 30 or 40 feet from the street, that's not terribly friendly. When it's 6 to 10 feet back, that's not bad. I mean, so I think you have to look at the context and look at the design.
Yeah. Yeah, that all makes sense. Right.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Like it's those the cut and dry, this is good or this is bad. Like it, the black and white is not what we live in, right? So it's those how you get the pieces right.
I mean, I think one of the hardest things for urban design right now is how to design for cars on a property and for parking and for driveways in ways that are consistent too with like pedestrian access to buildings. And I think that it's the inclusion of on-site parking in every building, new building, that sort of undermines so much walkability these days. Because it's so hard to like create driveways and garages while maintaining that that walkable feel that we used to build before cars dominated design. And that's why I think that if we can seize opportunities to like have it like centralized parking in areas and get parking out of some of the newly built buildings, like to not have parking minimums and to like make parking accessible in other places where like people who don't have cars might like want to move in, but if they have cars, they might like take advantage of parking remotely and like walk to their car when they need it and walk other places when they don't need to have their car. Um, that it's this push to have like ample parking on every site that makes walkability so hard. And we see that in shopping districts where like every store has its own parking. Then you like drive to the store and you drive away from the store and then you drive to the next store, like on Needham Street in Newton. Like that's how people get around versus not having parking in each building. And you can then have the buildings with no setbacks and you just go building to building.
Yeah, we were recently on a walk audit in Randolph, and in downtown Randolph, it was a sea of parking lots, and it was pretty hectic, like trying to walk around. And yeah, lots of driveways, small parking lots, big parking lots. They were kind of all over the place, and yeah, the stores definitely on one side of the street were way back, so there were these big parking lots, and to the point where some of the parking lots were underutilized, so they actually became makeshift roads to get people from one side to the other. So it was definitely challenging.
You know, my neighborhood's actually an example of this. So I'm in a two family and I have a shared driveway that goes through behind my house that's shared with two other two families. So it's 6 units have a shared driveway and it's a pain for parking. It is like stressful. Like we're sharing that driveway with so many people, but because of the design of it, we have one outlet to the street of the driveway instead of 6 different driveways for 6 different homes breaking up the sidewalk. And so in front of our house, it's just like open yard. And yeah, this is an area where kids run and play and go between houses. And it's like safe from all of this parking that is centralized. And it was just because it was built out in the 1920s before there was zoning and people saying you needed to have separate parking for every house.
Mm.
But I wanted to use that as an example because I'm on the planning board and we did a site plan review of a new development allowed as of right under the MBTA community zoning. And it only required, I don't know if it was like half a parking space or one parking space, maybe it's one parking space per unit. But it was again like maybe 6 units in a development. I'm not sure the exact stuff, but like people were looking at it and they're like, that driveway, it's a shared driveway in a new development. It looks so stressful. It's going to be a 10-point turn for people to get out. And someone said, maybe you should have done fewer units to like make the driving less stressful. And I was like, this is what's happened to us historically, because people know it's stressful to park tandem and to share your driveway. And it is convenient for everybody to have their own driveway. But then you end up with this situation that's not very walkable. It's not very aesthetically pleasing. And you can't have it like I couldn't have afforded my house if it had been a single family house with its own parking. Like I could afford it because I have a shared driveway and it's a two-family house. So like this kind of setup has its inconveniences, but we're not all millionaires. So that's kind of like the point of getting some of the parking out of every property is to create like more diversity in housing opportunities, to create more walkable designs, to make it so that not everybody has to have a car to like live in Massachusetts or Greater Boston. Young people can get around without having to drive too, and people who are disabled. There are lots of reasons why people don't drive, and we should be building the world for them to get around too. Um, so yeah, I think that I can like understand this mindset of like making things easier for driving and where that like came from. And I've read a lot of the historic documents going back to the 1920s and 30s and what people were thinking with zoning. And like they felt like this is, more convenient for everybody and easier for driving, but maybe didn't see what else that does to society and making places less walkable and friendly and community oriented when it's all like designed for the car. Um, but
Sherry, were you raising your hand? before. So
Yeah. I well the setback thing made me think about temperature when you're walking and when there's a little more grass or shrubs and trees and things like that, the comfort level that it might not change the temperature a lot, but it does give you a little stopping place sometimes. Last year, about this time when Boston had their record heat, the day it was like over 100, I walked to the State House for a hearing that day. Dear God, it was there was nothing but concrete and asphalt, all the way there. And it wouldn't have made a huge difference, but there is, I think it's aesthetic too, which is important to me because I walk everywhere. But it just made me think about temperature and the comfort. I remember the first time I met Brendan, we were in a meeting talking about families for safe streets, and something about walkability came up, and they mentioned heat and seating, benches being too hot to sit on, and that never crossed my mind as part of walkability. So I just think there's a comfort level that is a piece of that setback and landscaping and those kind of things. That's just crossed my mind. I just thought that was a point. Is it wasted space? Do you want to build to the edge of the sidewalk or the road or whatever?
To add to Sherry's point, last year we did the Boston MPO heat audit, and I strongly recommend everybody buy one of those heat guns because it's not a little bit of temperature. It's like 25 degrees difference. We were out on an 85-degree day, and some corners we're getting sun all day were like 118 degrees. It was shocking. And I was like, no wonder I'm hot out here. I thought I was a wimp.
Alexis, I'm glad you brought that up. We were in Revere a week and a half ago with some students there, and an ice cream truck pulled up, and he was like putting shade onto the sidewalk for maybe 5 minutes. And even that shade of his vehicle, it was like a 5 degree difference, and he had only been there for 5 minutes, right? Like, so even just like the little bit of shade that a large ice cream truck pulling up outside of school was giving, it was significant to me. So, Amy, it looks like you were about to say something.
Oh yeah, no, just there's so much debate about aesthetics of buildings, and I think that like we could go so far by planting more trees, and that like and that's a tough thing because trees grow so slowly. And like often when a new development goes in, that's like trees have been taken down to make way for it. And then they're planted, but they're small. But I think that's one of the like reasons people have these reactions to the new development is that the trees aren't there yet, and that once you have like mature street trees, it goes so far in making it like pleasant to be in a building, and it's so much more important than what the actual like structure of the building is. And I think wide sidewalks too. Like if you have wide sidewalk, people talk a lot about like the height of buildings and pedestrian experience, but I find just like I don't know. I was walking down Main Street in Worcester by like a very tall building and didn't feel it at all. And there's this very wide sidewalk. And so I think if we could debate the height of buildings less and the aesthetics probably less and spent more energy on wide sidewalks and street trees, we'd really like improve the pedestrian experience a lot and the aesthetic experience of being out in the public sphere more than work on like making buildings shorter and debating like materials used and stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, hot take, like sometimes shade that buildings throw is good. Like especially during the summer and stuff like that. So, um well, thank you so much, Amy. We're at the end of the hour, so just wanted to really thank you for joining us. This has been wonderful.
Thank you.
Really appreciate you throwing together a new slide deck with hot off the presses photos from your morning walk. That's
Yeah.
fantastic. So,
Okay.
um, great, and thank you everyone for joining us, and we hope to see you soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.